Hello, and welcome to the Northwood Podcast. I'm your host, Heath Jones, the pastor of Northwood Christian Church in Indianapolis, Indiana, recording this, looking rather scruffy and unshaven, on the eve of Easter. Don't worry, I'll spruce up before tomorrow, because Easter is the most important Christian holiday, even more so than Christmas. And I know that most people think it's Christmas, but no, it isn't. The holiday that calls us to remember that God calls life back from dead places, even dead bodies back from the brink. That is the most significant and powerful message that we have as Christians. And so Easter is it. Easter is the main thing. So we'll be talking about all of this after the ad break that we'll have here in a moment. But first, I'd like to refer you to a few places where you can learn more about us, our church, Northwood Christian Church. As I said, we're in Indianapolis, Indiana, and you can visit our website and access old sermons and Bible studies and worship times and other information, as well as all of the other things that go on in our building. Our website is www.indyncc.org. That's ndncc.org. Or you can write into me directly. My email is Heath, that's my name, Heath, at, same thing, ndncc.org. And if you're looking for more listening content, I encourage you to check out the other podcasts our producers at the All Indiana Podcast Network produce and distribute. The All Indiana Podcast Network produces podcasts recorded and made in Indiana by Hoosiers and often about topics of relevance to our state, though not exclusively. The topics, they run the gambit. And ours, the Northwood Podcast, is but one of many, many, many that you can choose from. And so I encourage you to check them out. Lastly, before we pause for an ad break for our podcast audience, I'd like you to pause this podcast or video, however you're accessing it, to like, subscribe, or follow us on whatever app that you're using. These points of engagement should direct more traffic our way. So please, if you don't mind, take the time to do that. Now, I just mentioned that we'll be pausing for some ads, and then we'll be back for the message. But first, here it is, some ads. And we're back. As I was saying before the break, we'll be talking about Easter. And our leaping off point will be the story as told in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 16, verses 1 through 8. That's Mark 16, 1 through 8. And here goes. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James, and Salome bought spices so that they might go and anoint him. And very early on the first day of the week, when the sun had risen, they went to the tomb. They had been saying to one another, "Who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb?" When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled back. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He has been raised. He is not here. Look, there is the place they laid him. But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going ahead of you to Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you." So they went out and fled from the tomb, for terror and amazement had seized them, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. When I was a kid, say about 10, I read a story by Mark Twain called A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. Less read, but not uncommon, not unheard of. And the premise is given away right there in the title. A Yankee, a Northerner, circa 1880, or thereabouts. Forgive me, I'm doing this from memory. But as I was saying, this man from Connecticut in the late 1800s, he's hit on the head, and then he finds himself mysteriously cast, apparently back in time to England specifically when King Arthur of the legends, of the Knights of the Round Table, and Guinevere and Lancelot and Merlin the Wizard, all that. in that time, when King Arthur is there ruling in his prime. Now, I won't get into all the details of the story, but I only brought it up because of one part regarding a solar eclipse that I just loved as a kid. The Connecticut man is pitted against his arch rival in the realm. That's Merlin, the wizard. And Merlin has a lot of clout in the king's court, but as the story unfolds, we'll discover him to be a bit of a fraud and a con, using tricks and sleight of hand and superstition to maintain control over the people, and even over the King Arthur himself. Well, one day, the Connecticut man bests Merlin by predicting a solar eclipse. So being from the future, he had a working knowledge of eclipses, how they functioned, and when they had occurred in history, and so he had foreknowledge, kind of like when Marty McFly gets a hold of the sports almanac from the future. He knows these dates, he knows when the eclipse will occur, and knowing that there's an eclipse coming just days away, so he proclaims that he will show himself to be more powerful than Merlin by darkening the sun at an appointed time. The people there didn't know about eclipses, you see, and the eclipse happens, and the people are understandably mystified, terrified. And the man wins the day. The Connecticut man wins the day. He exploits his understanding to gin up fear to maintain control in that setting. Now, the story's fictitious, of course. Hats off to Mark Twain, brilliant writer. But it's true, humans throughout time and history have certainly exploited the unknown in similar ways to gin up fear. It should be no surprise to anyone that human beings have been baking up conspiracy theories around eclipses, solar eclipses specifically, for centuries. Now, a total solar eclipse occurs every 18 months or so, actually, somewhere on the planet. But for much of human history, humans didn't know what was happening when a solar eclipse occurred. Solar eclipses were received with terror, and ancient peoples tried to decipher if they conveyed any divine meaning or some sort of significance to their lives. In ancient China, it was believed by some that a solar eclipse was caused by a large dragon swallowing the sun or trying to. So when an eclipse occurred, they'd dance loudly and make noises to ward off the dragon to defend the sun. And there's some research that suggests, although nothing conclusive, that perhaps ancient peoples who had been long engaged in conflict laid down their arms upon seeing an eclipse, believing it to be a divine sign. There's several stories about battles where the sky darkening brings it to a peaceable end. Centuries before Jesus was born, the Greek historian Herodotus, you've probably heard of, wrote that in the 6th year of war, the Lydians and the Medes were engaged in an indecisive battle when suddenly day turned into night, leading to both parties halting the fighting and negotiating a peace agreement. Now, historians are unsure if such event occurred. A lot of what Herodotus wrote was sometimes just flat out wrong and silly even. But this still gives us an idea as to how in the ancient world some learned people like Herodotus, for example, were in on the secret and knew how solar eclipses worked and when they would happen, for instance, because the Greeks started to calculate eclipses near and around his lifetime. So he would have been in the know. But still some that didn't understand what was going on remained afraid of eclipses. Others in the know weren't afraid. It's something that how fear of the unknown can hold us in its tight grip. Fear is a powerful motivator. And in moments when eclipses are not understood, they have given rise to fear. Take this, what the Greek poet Archilochus, I hope I'm saying that right, Archilochus, Greek poet, wrote of a solar eclipse that occurred in the 7th century BCE. Of it, he wrote, "Now nothing is unexpected or unbelievable or marvelous, now that Zeus, father of the Olympians, made night from midday, concealing the light of the blazing sun, and clammy fear came upon the people. After this, everything is believable and incredible to men. Let no one be surprised at what they see." So in other words, after this man became aware of an eclipse, he thought, the cork's off the bottle, anything can happen. and there's no putting it back, the mystery. Now, you may have noticed how our story ended today. It ended with the women who discovered Jesus' empty tomb, fleeing the tomb in awe and fear. This is how the earliest account we have of Jesus' death and resurrection ends, with these women running off in fear. Matthew, Luke, and John flesh out what happens next in much more detail. But Mark's gospel ends with the women running in fear and everyone wondering, what does this all mean? We don't get the interpretation of the resurrection, just the implication, really. And when we don't understand something, as I've been saying, we may lose our heads. All this to say, by the time 1994 rolled around, my 9-year-old version, 9-year-old Heath Jones, witnessed a partial solar eclipse, not a full one that we may expect here in about a week or a little over a week. But with my 3rd grade class, we were not afraid because we were in the know, like Herodotus and so many others since his time. Because in the weeks building up to that big day, it was all explained to us. And so we cut pinholes in boxes so we could witness the eclipse's shadow without hurting our eyes, because we know what may happen when we look straight into eclipse. Don't you know? Might damage your eyes. If you know that you might go blind even. Now, we all know this now. You probably, I'm sure, know this now, or at least you should know it. All of the information is out there. Just look it up on the internet. But there still are many, believe it or not, who remain ignorant. Or in the dark, pun intended. Anyway, I've discovered many lamentable yet predictable conspiracy theories today regarding this pending eclipse. That's going to happen here in Indianapolis, and in the weeks leading up to this moment, I've found several, but there's one that's most dominant. You may have heard that the totality of this eclipse is passing over all 8 of the towns or cities called Nineveh in the United States. So, oh my goodness, what are the odds? Actually, don't calculate them. You'd be wasting your time, and I'll explain why in a moment. But those that are making a big deal about this point, they note that it was Nineveh into which Jonah was called, and Jesus said it'll be like in the days of Nineveh, in those final days. And so maybe, definitely, some will say the eclipse passing over these cities. And the Jonah and the whale, that story, that's that same city, so wicked that God was going to destroy it. So Jonah was sent to warn them. And the conspiracy theorists go, see, this is a warning. This eclipse is trying to tell us something. Specifically, that the end is near and you should buy survival gear, and that the road to the end will be paved with violence, calamity, and suffering on a mass scale. Then they ask for your money for a variety of reasons. To this, I'll raise 2 objections. One, we could just as easily assume that the eclipse is bringing salvation rather than judgment if you're going to play that game. For didn't the people of Nineveh repent in the end? That was the punchline of the story. They did, so why do these online grifters insist that the eclipse is an evil omen? I mean, my thoughts on that after the second objection, which is, 2, the eclipse is not passing over every town called Nineveh in the United States. Not even close. It's just a fact. It's just not true. It's only, not that it would matter if it were true, but it's only passing over the one in Indiana, near where I live, and in the state of Ohio. Turns out, we're a nation that has held a lot of interest in the Jewish and Christian scriptures, so we've named hundreds and hundreds of towns and cities after, say, Bethlehem, Mount Zion, Salem, Shiloh, to name a few, just off the top of my head. Didn't even look it up. Oh, and yes, Nineveh. All this to say, I'd likely get conspiratorial if the eclipse managed to avoid all of these. I shudder to think what it would suggest. But okay, so I'm getting off track. Already wasted time. Distraction into fear, which is the point, to get us distracted and derailed by our fears of the unknown. And our fears cause us to make poor decisions, such as send end times prophets our money, would be one bad decision. And those peddling this fear today over their concerns around this eclipse are just the most recent in a long line of fearmongers. But when people remember eclipses, remember that they are rhythmic and predictable, as I said, every 18 months or so, somewhere on the planet happens, then they're no longer scary, nor even really miraculous. They remain astonishing, outstanding, amazing, awe-inspiring, But when we understand them, they're not scary. If future generations can maintain their attention spans long enough to remember what eclipses are, those that would exploit their fears over them will not be able to do so. And how if we could remember Easter in a similar way? Not only around this time of year, but on every other day besides. How if we could remember that there is a power in God that can call life from every tomb, and that's what this story is meant to teach us. And how if we could remember the history of God's doings with us, God's people, through the centuries. Those stories from the ancient past when God liberated oppressed peoples from their oppressors, where God called a people back toward life again and again and again. And there are stories we don't even know, not written down. Our studies of Revelation at the book of Revelation, the letter to the churches in Asia Minor, at our church have led us back still millennia further to the Exodus story, where the people were liberated from what was then the most powerful empire that the world that they knew of. And a way was made for them across a muddy sea. Impossible, right? But it was done. Then on the other side of those waters, they were met with other obstacles, one after another: dry deserts, scant food supply, enemies along the way. Yet the God who calls life from tombs called life from those dry places. In those stories, cycles of the same thing, themes repeating, never the same exactly, but echoing. And during later periods of struggle, new empires would conquer the Hebrew peoples, and yet through it, the people remembered those previous liberations and hoped that the God who had saved them before would do so again and again and again. It happens again and again. Centuries before Jesus was born, the Hebrew prophet Ezekiel wrote of a vision he had of a valley, picture it, filled with dry bones. Just filled, like a huge battle, thousands dead, now bones dry. The dry bones representing his people, cut down dead and beyond decay at this point. And here is part of the dialogue he shared with God in that story. And I'm going to quote it from him directly. He said to me, quoting, "Mortal, can these bones live?" I answered, "Oh, Lord God, you know." Then he said to me, "Prophesy to these bones and say to them, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord God to these bones, I will cause breath to enter you, and you shall live. I will lay sinews on you, and will cause flesh to come upon you, and cover you with skin, and put breath in you, and you shall live, and you shall know that I am the Lord." Ezekiel chapter 37, verses 3-6. And the people would find it to be true, that when they were scattered and seemingly lost for God, God would call the congregation back together into a newer iteration and a new liberation. Jesus kept reminding his disciples of this during those moments when he warned them of his own pending death. He told them that he would suffer and die and then rise again. He could see the writing on the wall. This just repeating the pattern. Jesus hopes they'll see it repeats the pattern that seems to be writ into creation. But the disciples could not remember this. Just a few weeks ago, we read about how the disciple Peter rebuked Jesus for alluding to his death, to Jesus' own death, to which Jesus responded, "Get behind me, Satan, for you do not have in mind the things of God, but human things." You know, if you can keep people's minds away from the hope found in Jesus, they may remain in fear. The disciples, they lost focus. They could not remember the old stories of redemption, so they remained in fear. They feared Jesus' death and their own because they could not remember what Jesus would soon teach them, remind them of yet again, that God can put life back on those dry bones. It stands to reason, that as soon as you allow, soon as you entertain the possibility that God called creation into form out of the chaos, the universe, the life in it, all of it, you and me, If God could do that once, why couldn't God do it again? In fact, Jesus' resurrection is just a little tiny piece of that, isn't it? Pinprick of that. Pinprick point. The forces of evil and destruction are, always pulling our world back apart, but God calls it back together again. So mortal, can these bones live? I ask you, yes. Because before they were bones at all, it was God who put flesh on them in the first place. Do you not think God could do it again? Easter reveals to Christians our conviction that God does it again and again and again. And so we cling to a hope that God will hold us through these storms right now. And even if we are drowned, we will not be abandoned by the God who created us. Remember Easter as you remember eclipses. It's still astonishing. It's beyond belief, but it's no more miraculous than our being here at all in the first place. So now in the year 2024, what dead places need life called from them? Where do I begin? The body politic, the streets of Indianapolis, not to mention other great American cities near where perhaps you live, the rubble of Gaza and the people buried therein. Yes, yes, and yes. Yes is across the board. God would call life, can call life, wills to call life back from these places and every other place. Or how about your own life? What dead places would you offer up for resurrection? What's more, what deaths will you die so that others might live? Mirroring Jesus and the love he showed. What cause will you take up? To what place will God call you to sacrifice your life, efforts, or resources, dying little deaths so that life might resurrect, seeds blooming back into life? For you see, we Christians remember Easter, eclipses and Easter. We do not forget that God has power over death. And because this is so, we don't have to be afraid anymore. We may have come to this place here today carrying with us much fear, but there is no death that we can face, that God will not hold us, sustain us through, even unto life. Because there's this one thing. Christians anticipate God to bring about a new heavens and a new earth. That's the penultimate restorative act we're waiting on, the resurrection of our entire world. So remember eclipses, sure, but remember Easter, remember it through it all, through the coming year. When things get bad in the coming year, and they might, I think, dry bones can live again, and so can you. Jesus has shown us the way. We don't have to flee the tombs of life, where life comes out cowering and afraid. So I'll say it in the traditional fashion, where the cleric will say, "He is risen," to which the people are meant to respond, "He is risen indeed." And this year I will add what we should remember always, and so too will you. This has been the Northwood Podcast. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe to the podcast by way of whatever app you use to listen, or leave a comment. These points of engagement drive more traffic our way. Or check out our website, www.indyncc.org. And also check out the other podcasts produced by the All Indiana Podcast Network. Until next time, this has been the Northwood Podcast. I am Heath Jones. Peace.